functions, okay? So in Kotlin, you know, functions are very easy to create in Kotlin. A function is just a block of code which only runs when it's called. Functions, you can pass in data, sometimes known as parameters, into the function. Functions are sometimes used to perform certain actions. Sometimes they're referred to as methods. There are some predefined functions that we'll already be using. System.out.println. A println is a function that we're already using to print stuff onto the screen. So you may come across Kotlin functions. So a typical example of a function we have right now is this here. This fun here is actually means function, and the name of it is called onCreate. The first time I saw fun, I thought these guys were taking, were just joking around, but it's actually quite interesting that function we shortened to fun, which makes it quite interesting. I mean, it's a play on words, but it's actually quite cool. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to create a function and how you can use that function. Okay. So let's say, for example, I'm going to create my own function here. So let's say I'm going to create a function, and my function, right, is going to be a function of that, okay, which will basically takes in two arguments, right, and then add the numbers together and then to just print them out, okay? So this function is not going to be a return function because you have a return function which actually returns something outside of the function so that you can use it. This function is just a simple function, okay? So I'm going to first create a function without it doing anything. Then I'm going to create a function which we can reuse it all the time, okay? So the first function I'm going to create is function fun, and let's say add. In Kotlin, that's how you create a function. Very simple to create a function. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say, let's say, for example, I had and two numbers. So I will do val num1 equals 5, val num2 equals 5. Then I will do system, right, dot out, dot println. Then I'll do num1 plus num2. I have created my function which adds in two numbers, 5 plus 5, and I'm expecting it to give me the number 10. Okay, now I've created my function. I'm now going to use my function. So how do I use my function? Well, in my override fun.onCreate, I am just going to call add. Okay, I'm just going to call add. And if I run my application, okay, can you see here the number 10? Okay, that is our function. Now, this is a very simple function, but I can make it easier for myself because now if I want to use this function add, I have to go in here and change the number. What if I want to make it generic? For example, I want anybody to enter a number inside. What I would do is I would now pass in some parameters, okay, which the function will now request for some parameters, okay? So in this case, what I can do here is I will specify in my function that, hey, my function is going to take in two parameters, for example. So I will show you a simpler way. So we'll do num1, and then I have to define the data type of what my function is going to be. So it's going to be an integer separated by another comma, and then num2, which is also going to be an integer. And instead of having these two variables now, I'm not going to be using these two variables anymore. I'm just going to delete them. And when I delete them, what I'm basically doing is num1 here is going to match up with the num1 I have in the system.println, and num2 is going to be passed in here. In case you're confused, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another function, right? Because I already have this function there. Let's say, for example, I would like to create another function. So fun add, and this time add is going to take in some parameters, multiple parameters. So num1 int, num2 int, and then I have a different kind of add. Now, what I'm going to do is system.out.println num1 plus num2. Have you noticed how I have two functions with the same name, but it's very different because Kotlin already recognizes, or the compiler recognizes that, hey, even though they have the same name, one actually has parameters, the other one does not have parameters. So if I was to call this add, it will know that I'm referring to this add because there's nothing inside. But with this add now, it's easier because what I can do is I can reuse it over and over again. I can just pass in the number 10 and pass in 10 again, and it will give me the what I'm supposed to, the output of what I want. I can do the same thing again, add, and then do 20 and 20. So I can reuse this function over and over and over again. So the first one gives me 20 and the second one gives me 40. That is how you create a function without parameters and a function with parameters. Okay. Now, the next function I'm going to create is a function that returns something, okay? That makes the function more generic at the same time, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a function which will return me the value, and then I can do whatever I want to do with the value. Because as it stands, both these functions just print out the output. But what if I need the output or the result to do something else? So for example, maybe I need to multiply 7 times 7, and then I need that output of 7 times 7, or 7 plus 7, or 7 times 25, 7 plus 7, 14. I need that 14 number to go and do something else. I would need that result to be returned to me. So in that case, I'm going to create fun add, again, num1 int num2 int, and then it's giving me an error because it's telling me, hey, you have two functions of the same, okay? But when we're creating a return function, the return, we have to actually specify what we want to return, okay? What kind of data type we'd like to return. So in this case, I'm going to return an integer. So I'm just going to do colon, then I'm going to do int, for example. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do return, right? Then I'm going to write num1 plus num2, okay? Then let's see what the error that is given us, okay? So sometimes I like to code with errors because errors helps us to understand what we're working with, okay? So sometimes when you're coding, you might get errors. There's no need to panic. There's no need to be upset. Sometimes you get errors and sometimes you may not get errors. So in this case, we are coding to just see what we have. So what we have here is we have a function with two integer parameters and an integer return type, okay? So let's play around with it. Let's see what error is telling us, okay? So we know that is because we have our parameters, and our parameters are taken in two our function is taking two parameters, just like our return type function. So in this case, what we're going to have, ideally, sometimes, you know, you will see developers put a circle bracket around it, you know, works. What we're going to do now is this here, add here, is no longer going to print out the value. What it's actually going to do is actually going to return us the value. Now, if it's returning us the value, we need to store that value, okay? So how do we store that value? Well, I'm just going to create a variable. So var result equals add. So what would happen to this now is the value of 20 will now be stored in result. And then I will be able to now do system.out.println result. Now someone will ask, so Emmanuel, what's the point of me returning the number? Well, there will be cases where you'll be developing an app, and then your add function would be a generic function that you create because you may use it all throughout your entire program. So you might want to use that function to return you the value, and then use the value instead of you having to repeat the same code over and over and over again. Okay, so that is how you create functions, one without a return, one with a return, okay, and with parameters as well. That is how functions work in Kotlin.